Welcome to another episode of Absolute AppSec, where I believe this is episode 10. I'm joined by our co-host, my co-host, Seth Law.
Hey, everybody. Welcome.
And we've got a special guest tonight, Jimmy Mesta. Jimmy, say hi.
Hey, everyone.
Do you prefer Jimmy or Jim?
Jimmy's good. I'll transition to Jim in like 10 years or so.
Once you get some gray hair, you can decide, right?
Exactly.
Become more distinguished.
No, then I go to James.
Then you go to James?
Yeah. That's 20 years. That's 20 years.
Yeah, that's when I hit 50 years old. Exactly.
You got to earn James.
You do.
So to give you all a little brief introduction to Jimmy, I met Jimmy a while back. I don't remember the year, but Jimmy has co-organized AppSec Cali for what? Like, has it been 4 years or 5 years?
All of them except for this last one because baby. But yes, but the first one with Neil when he was the founding father. So.
Yeah, now he's off building another conference with is it Jim Manico, the Locomoco Sec one?
Yeah.
Yep. And Jeremiah Grossman, I believe. So.
Oh, nice. So, Jimmy, you've done the couple things I wanted everyone to know before we really kind of get into it is that you've done a couple what I would consider like one of those tackling a lot of things type roles, meaning the security team you've worked on has not been huge, and you've been responsible. I mean, at TrueCar, Invoca, playing blue team, playing defense, and working with the resources that you had. So that's kind of, I mean, is it accurate to say that's kind of your background as you've dealt with kind of getting creative?
Yeah, my most recent background is on the defensive side for sure. I did have a 2.5-year stint as a pure web application penetration tester at a company called Redspin. So just doing assessments for banks and hospitals and pretty standard consulting stuff. But yeah, I would say that's definitely accurate. The one-man show for a little bit, building up what would be the application and information security programs at mostly SaaS companies. So,
yeah, I mean, if anyone has any questions, in that someone like Jimmy could answer, please post them in the live chat because I think that you have a unique perspective having played that role. Jimmy has done a lot of, he's speaker, trainer, open source contributor. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about his training course and about just in general Kubernetes and Docker, basically container security and deployment, the security of those deployments. One of the questions that I wanted to get right into, Jimmy, is where are you now and what are you working on?
I am physically located right now in Flagstaff, Arizona. Recently moved here. I have a 2-month-old named Giovanni, so he's already popping shells every now and then before he goes to bed. So it's been awesome. I moved here from Santa Barbara, but for work, my journey has been, I would say, like traditional in other industries, but for InfoSec is a little bit different. So I actually graduated with a degree in information security, took a technical track at Penn State University. I was the first full graduating class with that degree in 2009. So that was pretty eye-opening, and everybody was asking me at the time, like, what are you going to do with this degree? It's not that long ago, but it seems like people didn't understand what the job market looked like, and started working at a company called Agilent Technologies on their security and risk management team. So pretty large company, spin off of HP, and firewall because nobody else wanted to do it. AppSec wasn't even like, that was just an afterthought. It was a checkbox they needed, and they spent a bunch of money on these really nice Imperva WAFs and let me, the brand new college grad, just plug my computer into them and put them right in front of production applications, breaking SSL and doing all sorts of bad things and causing downtime. But really that was like sparked a huge interest in just application security, software security. Knew I didn't want to really go too far down the network or risk management rabbit hole. So went to a SANS course, thought it was awesome, and decided to become a pen tester. Did that for a couple years, and really, like, I recommend anybody who wants to jump into this field do a stint as a consultant doing web app pen tests or network pen tests, red teaming, whatever you want to call it. I think it was just a really cool time to work on those assessments. And then later went to become, I guess, the first full-time hire at TrueCar on their ops team. They didn't have a security team at the time quite yet. So did that and built everything I could from the ground up at a pretty large company. There were like 600 employees or something at the time. And then I got to use lots of AppSec skills, and I had to learn a ton about compliance and training and architecture and all the good stuff that comes with riding solo. Then ended up at another SaaS company a little closer to home, so I didn't have to drive 2 hours to the office in Santa Monica, called Invoca, where I spent a couple years there and kind of did the same thing, just I had a lot of lessons learned, so it was much more smooth than before, and actually was able to get Invoca PCI certified, so I had to wear a compliance hat for a while, did a lot of privacy stuff, and built an AppSec program there, and kind of helped form their what now is a more mature Kubernetes environment. It was very early stages then. So, and now I'm an independent contractor trying to run my own little consulting company called Mesta Machine, and I primarily do technical hands-on training for pretty large organizations, but I guess any size. And I still do web application testing quite a bit, and I do online security modules and a little bit of research sprinkled in there. So we're talking to Seth earlier. Now it's like I have 4 full-time jobs instead of 1. But I really like it. I'm constantly challenged, and I have way less meetings, which I'm super happy about.
Yeah. Less meetings is a big thing, right?
It's huge. Yeah, I didn't realize how that would go away like it did.
Yeah. But yeah, what I find is, the 1 to 2 that I have, I'm like super stressed about, whereas you used to have like 6 or 7 of them in a day, and it just wasn't a big deal. But
yeah, there's no tap your shoulder and come into this room, I need to ask you a couple questions type meetings. Yeah, so lately I've been working on a 2-day securing modern DevOps environments course, it's called, and it's a hands-on, totally like technical course on building a Kubernetes cluster, actually it's taking a simple API, Dockerizing it, scanning it for vulnerabilities, building a cluster, deploying the app, and then hardening the cluster, and then building a minimal monitoring and alerting and a little CI/CD pipeline within it. So I've just been heads down for like months now. So doing that, and I'm loving it. So
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my story.
Out of curiosity, I had a couple questions, but the first one was in terms of I was just waiting to make sure I didn't interrupt Seth again. But what made you go for the information security degree? Being that was, and you said it's not that long ago, but 9 years is there's been a huge evolution and a lot of changes in 9 years. So yeah, what was your how did you get interested in that?
Well, I guess I had a knack. I was always hanging out in the computer lab in like high school and stuff, and doing little websites, and we would make basically edit videos and put them on HTML sites. And so I went into Penn State not really knowing what a full-time job even meant at the time. And I had a little bit of push from the family to be like, you need to go down this track. It's like, look at the average starting salary, just go there. Because I wanted to be a graphic designer at first. And then I started in the School of Information Sciences and Technology, which is like, it's in the same building as computer science, but it's more like in between a business major and a comp sci major, where you kind of, they bridge that gap in between the two. And then they spun up a new major as I was there in security. And I just thought, like, they had some guest speakers come in because the NSA actually, from what I understand, funded the majority of the major because they wanted to handpick some college grads after. And I just thought the people doing this stuff that came in to talk to us, that was the coolest thing ever. Like espionage and these crazy stories. And it was just so new and exciting. So I was semi-aimless at the time anyways. So I decided to just take it for a ride. And now I can't even fathom doing something else. So
yeah. I'm laughing because I'm watching these questions in live chat, and they range from everything from Candlewood Suites, or no, is that it's? I think it was it was supposed to be Candlewood Suites because I know this whole thing there, but I know the backstory on that. But
do I know the backstory on that?
You know what? I mean, why not? So the backstory on this is that, so this is Mike who's asking questions. Mike, myself, and a couple other people, like we went to, in Austin and LastCon, we went to Candlewoods. And even when we didn't want to go to Candlewood Suites, because of hotel issues, we ended up back at Candlewood Suites, and it is sketchy as hell. So, but you know what? They treated us right, and it was fine. So, it was like this whole, because like the stories we could tell about Candlewood Suites. There's something there. There's a whole nother episode there, but
there's some magic behind the Candlewood Suites, huh?
There is, yeah. If by magic you mean pretty sure the neighbors are making meth in their hotel bathtub, then
that's
yes.
Magic.
Yeah, I mean, science, man.
It's science.
It is science. Oh, so the first relevant, I think, kind of relevant question was Kubernetes or ECS for managing containers.
That's a total preference from a security perspective. You could probably end up at the same result. You could misconfigure both of them. I personally I made a really solid go at ECS about 6 months ago. And I just didn't find it to have the features I needed that Kubernetes offered.
So is that from a security perspective or just a usability?
Just usability. I didn't dive into the security internals of it totally. I'd imagine a lot of the problems that could exist in Kubernetes would also exist there. And if you're native to AWS and you're not leaving and you're okay with being tied into AWS for your container orchestration, then not a bad option because everything is already there. You don't have to set up a new cluster or billing, because setting up Kubernetes in AWS that's its own separate daunting task also. It's getting easier, but I kind of jumped on the full GKE Google Cloud bandwagon. I have a friend that's a solutions architect for Kubernetes, and I started like writing code in Golang and doing everything in Google. So I kind of...
Wait, Google has a cloud platform? I'm confused.
Messed up.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I know AWS
is king right now, but
it's totally king, and Google's not quite hanging, but
Seth and I had our fair share of issues with Google Cloud, to be fair, with like, there were like issues where where there would be, I can't remember if it was low memory or low disk space, something like that. And then like we tried bumping up the settings and saying like, hey, you can charge us more. And then that interface was so counterintuitive that we didn't end up checking the right thing. And it was really confusing. And then basically we ended up every once in a while coming to that same error. And then, yeah, eventually we figured it out, but it was like the worst interface for managing costs and memory and all that stuff. I mean, was it memory or?
It was memory. Yeah, it was like, once you go over your memory allotment for so long, they just kill the process, right?
Right.
Yeah, it has its shortcomings, but GKE is like the Google Kubernetes engine. Managed Kubernetes it's pretty sweet. I mean, it takes a lot of the configuration and a lot of the maintenance out of it. Upgrades are fairly smooth. I'm a fan. Like, it's just
cool.
So Cloud Shell is.
Course? Is that what you're using in the course? Is the
that
local?
So there's two versions of the course. That one will use GKE for large groups. That gets a little precarious when you want to have like 200 people sign up for a free tier of Google Cloud at the same time and then set all that up. I have a version that uses Minikube. So that's a local Kubernetes single node cluster using VirtualBox, like pretty minimal footprint to install. And it's gotten pretty good. You can do almost everything you would want to do in GKE. You're missing, obviously, you don't have like the load balancer type because it can't spin up a cloud load balancer for you, things like that. But I'd say for the basics, it's pretty good if you have enough memory on your machine.
If you have enough memory. Well, isn't that always the caveat, right?
With virtual machines, yeah. I actually, the way I set it up is like we're not running anything crazy. It's like 100-line Go API and a couple sidecar pods, and it's it runs fine on Minikube. Even with a beat up machine, I think it would do okay.
Which is that isn't that sort of the point though, is to use such like incredibly lightweight services and have multiple, microservices, these little APIs that can all communicate with one another.
Yeah, the monolith, decoupling the monolith is a thing, but it's a balance, right? Because I tried to do, so the background, I have a Chrome extension that I'll shamelessly plug called unshortened.link. It basically is because I hate link shorteners and I hate clicking on any link that's shortened. But anyways, the extension automatically expands it. So I've rewritten it like 3 or 4 times, and this last go around was using Golang and Kubernetes, and that costs me way more to run it than I make off of it because I make $0 off of it currently. But anyways, it's a good learning opportunity. And yeah, I tried to break everything up into microservices, but it's not always that easy. And I don't think you should do it for the sake of it. If you're not running into performance issues and you don't have separate teams working on each API, then it might not be the best use of your time. But that's just my opinion.
Wait,
yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so one architecture doesn't fit for everything? Again, yeah. I'm so confused.
Yeah, no, I mean, you would think that everything should be a microservice at this point, but I do think that it doesn't always work out that way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't always scale. Sorry, Ken, what were you going to say?
Same thing, different way. Yeah, no, because there's the cost associated with the maintaining and with just the actual like costs of running this, and then there the complexity. There's a complexity cost. So
when you have to authenticate all of these microservices, and that's never easy. That's in Kubernetes, like what is it? Istio has a service mesh that can help do that sort of thing. And I talk about it in the training, but it's like most people don't they don't have the in-house expertise to set things like that up properly. So the monolith can make you lots of money if you run a company. So it's funny how my mind has shifted to just that. So
yeah, I mean, you can get off the ground, you can get something going, you know.
Yeah, and then you peel off things as they become overburdened or the load becomes too high, and then you start considering microservices as you need them. I don't know the exact answer, but it's not start with microservices when you have no traffic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer I've always felt, and you know, again, this is just one person's opinion, but I've always felt you'll know when you have that need. But until you have that need, why burden yourself with more complexity? I mean, the best built systems are the simplest ones. That's just I mean, that's the way I've you know, I've always seen it. At least they start out that way, right?
Yeah.
Things change over time.
Kubernetes doesn't fall into that category whatsoever, but that's okay.
Well, you know, okay, so I mean, Kubernetes in the sense that it's got some complexity, or in the sense that you can manage your deployments?
Oh, I just think it's complex, and people tend to want to use it because it's a thing people use when they don't always like, usually a traditional platform or a platform as a service, or there's other ways to like do the things that Kubernetes does that are probably, it's like learning a different programming language, you know? So I would say if you're at the point where you need that elasticity and that the things that Kubernetes offers, especially if you already have everything in containers and you're ready to make that leap into a kind of heavyweight orchestration tool, it's the one to use, in my opinion. If you're running like Docker Swarm or Docker Compose on like 2 servers somewhere behind the load balancer in AWS, I'm just like not sure. It's a steep learning curve, in my opinion. And I'm still learning new things about it every single day, just because it's moving so fast.
Now, and I know Kelsey Hightower has talked about this a bit, but like, do you think that Google's actually gonna? I mean, have you seen? Basically, it's been put out that like, hey, Google doesn't want to basically add on more and more features at this point. That's what I understood. Like as of maybe a year and a half ago, and that the any additional features would be in the way of like extensions for Kubernetes. Is that I mean, what are you seeing?
I'm not seeing features slow down too much. There is this like cyclical thing of things come in alpha in like 1.6 and then beta in 1.8 and then, you know, GA in 1.9. And I don't see that changing, but they've addressed some of those like big concerns, like encrypting secrets at rest in etcd. It's like people were kind of like, why aren't we doing that yet? So, you know, they built that in, and they have audit functionality now. So I think they're still building features, and I have no idea what Google's plan is, other than Kubernetes is still like the number 2 like repo or something in GitHub. Like it's widely contributed to. It's a very popular open source project. So I'm not sure that's going to go away.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean go away. I just meant like at a certain point, from the way I understood it, it was that the core functionality was there and that was developed, and that any new features. But I mean, that's just what I heard.
Yeah, maybe I got an insider I can ask. We'll see. I would say you can get a lot of things done currently right now, especially with the ecosystem that is evolving for, you know, logging and monitoring and all these sidecar containers, and now like you have like Aqua Security and Twistlock, and all these guys are out there commercializing Kubernetes security and sysdig, and so there's a pretty healthy ecosystem growing, which I'm happy about.
So in terms of like going back to the API authentication, have you seen what solutions have you seen? I mean, I know like there's Cognito API Gateway. Anything else that you've seen used?
Sorry, you totally just, maybe that was just for me, but you broke up during that question. Big time.
I was saying, yeah, sorry about that. I don't know if I'm having internet issues, but yeah. So I was asking, going back to the API authentication, like, have you seen like a Cognito API Gateway kind of combination? Have you seen, like, what else have you seen people use to, basically authenticate across various pods, we'll say, or APIs?
Istio is what I'm hearing about, people are using with mutual TLS authentication. So I have not dug into it much at all. There's also the notion of the pod network policy, I think it's called. It's basically like whitelisting pod-to-pod communication natively in Kubernetes. So that's pretty cool, where you could say, I only will accept traffic from this pod labeled front end if I'm the back end. And you can do that kind of fine-grained control for communications. But mutual TLS authentication is probably the way to go if you actually need to take that seriously. So, but it's definitely challenging. It's not, there's nothing out of the box that's letting your microservices be authenticated within Kubernetes necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, both of those sound like a pretty big time investment or upfront investment to get running properly, right? I mean, mutual TLS always has been, but whatever other services are there, you would think that Kubernetes would make that a little bit easier, though.
Yeah, I mean, the network policies can create quasi firewall rules for you, and again, it's so new, it's fairly new, so I'm not even, haven't seen it in the wild. I fear that there are a lot of misconfigured Kubernetes clusters. It's just a guess, but I'm assuming that not a lot of people are looking at this stuff with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Twistlock and some of those other vendors, right? Don't they evaluate some of the network policy?
They may, yeah. I haven't even, the commercial stuff, I don't get much past some of the documentation. Haven't played with them. Okay. But yeah, Istio has an open source product that you can use that can help with that. But they use what's called an Envoy proxy, Envoy pod, I think it's called, and it's basically a sidecar pod that all your traffic gets routed through. Okay. Every service, all your traffic will get routed through this, and it sits right next to all your pods. Has a certificate authority and the whole 9 yards. So you don't actually have to go and like reconfigure your manifest files or even your application necessarily to take advantage of it. So I do think that that's probably the way to go. But it's not lightweight. Like you couldn't, that's a big undertaking to say, hey, route all my cluster traffic through these new pods that are sitting here. So,
well, I mean, along those lines, right? One of the first questions that we had, I think it was from Mike, was related to evaluating security and, and what to use for, what was it? Image vuln scanning, right? What have you used? What's available out there? What do you recommend?
Image vuln scanning is really interesting because everyone says you have to do it, and then people always still end up pulling in the default version of Nginx or Redis or whatever. And there's not a lot you can do with that other than building new images yourself, which you can do. But I've, in the course, actually, we use Claire, which is the open source version of Quay. I don't know how to pronounce it. Quay, I believe. So that Claire works pretty well in a CI/CD pipeline. And so it's called Claire Scanner in GitHub. So you could check that out. And I think that's probably the way to go if you have images going through sort of a Jenkins CI/CD environment, and you can say, because you can whitelist a lot of things in Claire as well, and then you can stop the build or whatever you want to do after that. There's also a company out of Santa Barbara called Encore, Anchore. They are really, really good guys, and they are building an open. It's a vulnerability scanner, but it's also like a gating architecture where you can put logic into your image builds, where you say if this thing doesn't meet a certain threshold, or if you're doing a bad import, or if your formatting of your Docker file is out of whack, like do something, stop the build, whatever you want to do. It's built for Jenkins style implementations. They have an open source tool as well, and they have a really cool dashboard at Encore, Anchore.io, I think. Yeah, so that is pretty sweet because you can just go look. They just rip through all, like Docker Hub for all the public images, run scans on them, and then they blow them up, so they show all the packages they're installing and give them severities. You have links to CVEs, so you can put any repository you want in their site, and you kind of get that for free, which is cool. It's just a very useful tool, and it's very eye-opening when you see these crazy popular images sitting on Docker Hub that are riddled with awfulness. So yeah, definitely check those out.
I've pasted the links to all of everything we've mentioned, I think, in the live chat, and we'll also put it in the description of this video for those who want to check it out later.
Cool. Does that cover the image vulnerability scanning? There's lots of options, but at the end of the day, you have to make a decision if you're going to pull, if your base is from something that has 14 criticals.
Yeah, and that's always been the big problem, right? I mean, I think that's why there's so many security people trying to solve it, is that, you're starting from something that's so either out of date or vulnerable that it's hard to secure and make sure that it's secured across the board without rolling your own.
Yeah, and I think the right way is obviously to roll your own, build it from scratch, which you can get a lot of performance benefits that way. Your builds will take much less time. The images will be way smaller. But not everybody's doing that. Developers, even I'm guilty of, definitely, like, from Ruby, it just makes your life a little easier. So, but in any kind of sensitive environment, you want to be cognizant of all these vulnerabilities you're bringing in. It's been around forever, right? Like outdated third-party dependencies. The OWASP talked about top 10 thing all the time, forever and always, like third-party vulnerabilities. And this is no different, except you're basically like bringing in a whole operating system full of them. So it's cool. Fun times.
Fun times? Well, yeah. Fun times for us maybe, but.
Yeah, not if you're, should not be trying to defend it, I guess. It's like, I used to think that stuff was fun, and you have to eat your own dog food.
Yeah.
Drink your own champagne.
You drink your own champagne. Yep, there you go. Let's see, what else? What other questions do we have in there?
We had one on, hey, have you seen Docker basically breaking out of the container in the wild, or have you seen much in that regard? Which that seems to come up all the time. Like, hey, is there a way to break out of a Docker container and attack the host or something along those lines?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's valid, and I think that was the looming fear several years ago when Docker was the new kid on the block. Everyone's like, no, you're just going to break out of that and virtual machines for life. But I've not seen that in the wild in any customers I work with. There, obviously, you can Google Docker or any sort of container breakout write-ups that are out there, and they exist, and they probably will continue to exist, but it's not a thing I totally worry about. There's actually an interesting talk from Cloud Native Con or something, but he distributed a vulnerable Docker image on Docker Hub, wrote a couple blog posts about it, and like got 500 pulls in the first month. And you don't need to break out of your Docker container if you just implanted that thing all over the place, because people are just blindly Docker pull. Like, it's a no-brainer. So that's probably the bigger issue when it comes back to let's inspect our containers before we actually throw them up on Kubernetes, because you have one vulnerable container and a slightly misconfigured Kubernetes cluster, not even misconfigured, just not taking advantage of all of the hardening features that are out there. Like, you could grab the AWS metadata keys thing. I mean, there's all these things you can do once you're kind of penetrate the crunchy exterior in a Kubernetes cluster.
Sorry. No, you had broken up for a sec, and I was trying to figure out where was that article so I can post it, or who gave that talk?
Actually, it's Brad Giesemann, Symantec, and it's hacking and hardening Kubernetes clusters by example, and it was at CCNF is who published it. KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, last year.
Okay.
It's a great talk. He mentions a couple really interesting tools at the end. That's another space that's like evolving as well. Like Aqua Security has KubeBench, and then the CIS benchmark is actually really a useful piece of documentation when you're rolling out Kubernetes. It's for 1.8 still, but it's still totally relevant. And that can help guide you in your secure Kubernetes implementation. And then KubeBench audits, it's a command line utility that audits against the CIS benchmark.
Very cool. And I mean, it goes to the same kind of like what we already see in application security, being concerned with your software supply chain, dependency management. What solutions are out there? I mean, there's like for that, there's Black Duck. There's
dependency check, OWASP,
Sneak or Snick.
Yes.
SNYK.io.
They just got a bunch of funding too, I saw yesterday.
Yeah, and actually, like I've been pretty impressed with them. Like their coverage of languages is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Dependency check or some of the open source.
Dependency check's awesome, except it doesn't cover. Well, then there's a bundler audit.
Yep.
If you're bringing in gems. But yeah, I mean,
there's GitHub itself.
There's the plug. There's NSP.
That's right. You could just send it to Ken and he'll check manually.
That's me. That's what's happening.
Is that your microservice?
That's what I am the microservice. I just sit here, I get a paper out and a pen, and I go one by one.
Like static code analysis or just source code analysis.
Why it took so long, Ken? But now we know.
I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. Okay. I did find a YouTube video of that talk you mentioned by Brad, so cool. I'm posting that now, and I will.
Yeah. So there's another talk I'd like to plug, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
It is. I had to watch it. Two of the core Kubernetes engineers at Google, like these guys are on another level, but let me just make sure this is it and I'll send it to you. Yeah, it's called The Ins and Outs of Networking in Google Container Engine and Kubernetes. It doesn't pertain that much to GCE. It's really just like Kubernetes 101 from a networking perspective, where you can they just drill home these concepts of how networking works in Kubernetes, and it takes the magic out of it. Like it's not just this mythical thing that packets get routed and they just show up. So I'd recommend anybody that's interested in Kubernetes. I just pasted the link in our Hangout.
Okay, awesome. I was looking for it. I was all geared up for it. All right, I reposted that, so hopefully that link work. Oh, cool. Yeah. All right.
Well, and I think that's the problem that most AppSec people have coming into it, right? Is they don't necessarily have a networking, like their background is all code. So, being able to type a couple commands and spin up a container is great when it pulls down my code from GitHub and it runs it. That's all I have to worry about. So that's really what we're looking for, is how to push that level and push that understanding into the network space or into the configuration space, so that we can actually secure it, right? I mean, who are you working with when it comes to like training in general? I mean, is it more developers that you're running into, or system administrators? QA people? What, give us a dump on that.
That's a good question. So it's intended for everyone, and not everyone in the sense of like the whole company, obviously, but it's for the software development, engineering, IT department. So it really is geared towards sysadmins will have a good time with it, especially if they're new to Kubernetes. And I think developers can really like get some takeaways on how to better package their code and the implications of deploying what they've written to containers and how Kubernetes works from the inside out. And QA probably could find some use in it, but some of it might just be a little bit too much that just wouldn't be relevant. But really, I tried to build it for developers because that's who the people asking for this course and who I'm engaged with to present this course this year it's literally like the full gamut, but it's mostly for developers and sysadmins and DevOps teams. Obviously, they'll have a little, they'll have to sit through a couple lessons that are obviously maybe a little bit of review. But honestly, I've reviewed Kubernetes basics over and over. I mean, it's probably like once a month I'll go back and just make sure my brain is working in the sense of like where the traffic's being routed, how everything actually gets glued together. Because now there's these new features that are getting rolled out that you have to understand. Like if Kubernetes comes out and says, hey, we now encrypt secrets at rest, everyone's super excited from the AppSec side. They're like, sick, like that's what I want. But they don't really know why that was needed or what that means in the Kubernetes realm, because it's etcd and it's a key value store and it's plain text, and now it's not. But if you have access to the master node, there are still ways to read secrets potentially. Like it's not like a catch-all. And I think understanding how Kubernetes works is my biggest recommendation. So that's what this course really is heavy on. And we sprinkle in security as we go. And it starts with like, here's a container and here's how you secure it. Here's Kubernetes, and here's why some of the defaults might not work for you. And then here's how you deploy it, but how do we get it out there so it can only talk to what it's supposed to talk to? So that's kind of the goal of the course. And there might be an advanced version later, but I think there's a lot of knowledge to be spread about what's going on under the hood. And I'm still learning all the time too, so.
Yeah, we've talked. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, along those lines, right? Obviously, hands-on experience is the best, and what you're teaching. But if you were to point somebody, hey, I've got an hour and I just got dumped this, where do they start, right? I mean, that's always something. Is are there channels or something that I should be watching from a Kubernetes security perspective? How do I evaluate what I currently have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's definitely places to start. And I'm trying to like think back to where I spend most of my day, which Doc's I'm in.
Yeah.
And the Kubernetes docs themselves are, I think they're great. Some people hate on Google documentation for whatever reason. I'm not much of a snob on docs in general, but they have a deploying clusters securely. It's not a white paper, but it's kind of a one pager that has links to all these other things, and they keep it really up to date when like a new feature comes out that's, you know, secrets encryption or security context and things like that. That's going to give you the most bang for your buck, because you're going to probably find where you need to be to dive into whatever problem you're running into. And then, you know, the talks I mentioned, those are really good too. But, you know, in running Kubench, KUBE-bench on your cluster or your YAML files, your manifests, could also shed some light onto some major issues. That's from Aqua Security, and that is a just command line utility. So that's super helpful. And yeah, there's Aqua Security, I just saw it yesterday, has a wiki, container technology wiki, I think. And then within that wiki, they have a Kubernetes 101, and then they have a container security section too. So it's aquasec.com/wiki. So dive around there. That they have tons of links to other things too for Kubernetes security.
Sweet.
Yep, secure a cluster. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great piece of simple. I mean, I don't think it's simple, but it covers the core topics and tenets of Kubernetes security. So
I mean, it's funny because everything always kind of falls back to those different, like, you know, overarching security concepts: your authentication, your authorization, your auditing, your handling of input, you know, handling of network traffic, all that kind of stuff is. You know,
yep, doesn't change at all.
No,
it's just a shiny. It's a shiny new toy that you could still put crappy code onto.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Basically, like, you know, your web app phones are all there. I just think the implications of compromising a Kubernetes node, they could be pretty, I mean, huge, because if you can spin up your own, like in that talk from Brad Giesemann, like if you can spin up your own pods, pull down your own containers, I mean, you could own an AWS account if you were able to get your own container running on a Kubernetes cluster, if you don't set things up right. And it's, you know, default isn't, you don't get all this stuff out of the box. Like, you don't, secrets encryption is like, you got to go in and like to the API server and make, you know, change some flags. You got to do stuff that's not super straightforward to turn certain things on, especially if you're in a highly sensitive environment where you're like, you don't have the luxury of dealing with that. So I would definitely, before you just use Kubernetes because it sounds cool, like take a hard look at the security docs and make sure you're doing stuff right from day one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I've run into it with a couple different places that are doing, you know, DevOps, and right. That's always their question is, hey, where do we start? So,
well, hopefully
we'll have to talk after this.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'm also working on a Kubernetes security audit offering as part of my consult. Or, you know, it's like, yeah, we need web app pen tests. We'll always need that, but I really think there's audits that need to occur and architecture reviews and things that need to happen. Because what I've also found is, like, you can think you turned something on because you have it in your YAML file, you deployed it up, but until you go try to SSH to a node and you get denied, you don't know for sure always. There's not like, it's not absolute. So I recommend, if you're going to turn these features on, again, I come back to the encryption of secrets and etcd. It's like, go use etcd command line utility and pull up the secret you just put in, and make sure that that thing is actually encrypted, because it's not like there's some button that comes up and says you're good, like for sure. So it's like anything, you know, like it's not that straightforward to turn on, and it's in alpha, I believe. So you're living on the edge a little bit. So verify what you're doing in your Kubernetes cluster.
Cool. Yeah, we had another question from Ken Toller. Hey, Ken, about something that handles API to API authentication well. So between, let's see.
Yeah, his is interesting because it's
Docker containers and an old API running on EC2 that allows you to get the auth up so that migration of the legacy API can be done without it. So running 2 auth mechanisms. I don't know if I quite understand what that question is.
Wait, let's see if I can read it.
Yeah, give it a read and see if it Ken, did you understand where you were going?
Mixed environment, something that handles API to API auth well between, say, Docker containers and an old. Oh, so maybe like some sort of shim that you can
some auth proxy
you can prop up, and Istio is supposed to do that sort of thing. I'm not I can't speak to, you know, legacy. Well, I wouldn't really. I mean, I think Istio is a Kubernetes plugin for the most part, so I don't know if you could even prop that up on a straight up EC2 instance. Without going in and changing your legacy code, could you? There's some sort of. Wasn't there an API service or API proxy in AWS that you can set up some sort of authentication to front things, or at least in Lambda?
Yeah, you'd think that there would be, right? Lambda, or some sort of configured API gateway to do that for you.
API gateway, that's what it's called, and that has auth capabilities, but I've only ever used it with Lambda like once. And
yeah, you can plug it into Cognito, but then you're like setting up. You're entirely dependent on Cognito auth. So if you're okay being tied into AWS, cool. If you're not, then I wouldn't recommend it. But
just burn your legacy apps down.
Yeah, and I think you have to point. So you'd have to point Cognito at all your routes, or sorry, not Cognito. API gateway. API gateway at all your routes. The good thing about Cognito, I can say, I don't know if you guys used it, but there are some good things about it. Like you can do. Well, I think we looked at that, Seth. So you can do SMS 2-factor auth. I think you can do TOTP 2-factor auth. You can do you can configure pretty easily do you want to require verification of email? Like you can do all those normal authentication security mechanisms, and then you plug it into API gateway, and effectively the user sends on a whatever I don't know, token, we'll say. I don't remember what it is, and whenever they hit one of those API gateway routes, and that token or whatever it is, that comes from having authenticated to Cognito. That's my understanding. I don't know if you all see something different.
Yeah,
just that's all you, man.
Oh no, I that's exactly. I don't necessarily have any other feedback on that. Right, we would have to investigate further. But I think that's what Ken's asking, right? Is setting up something without 2 auth mechanisms that can actually talk between the two. I don't know.
Well, legacy is always the hard part to deal with. I mean,
just drop it. There's nothing in legacy that we need, right? From a business perspective.
No.
So the other question is, are you pumped about EKS? Which I didn't even know EKS was a thing. I'm lagging on my AWS knowledge these days.
Oh, one thing to go back to that last question, I just remembered that I don't know if this is even the answer would work, but I've used Kong before as an API gateway. It's just like like a management layer that you can plug in front of different APIs. And that has lots of like a whole plugin ecosystem to go. I think it's just a Golang project, or you run it in Docker or something. So you might be able to front anything legacy there, and it could handle mutual TLS or something. I can't really speak for it, but I know that it lives in between services like that.
I messed with Kong before, and it's like you said, it runs in a container, and it's configurable. The last time I used it, I want to say it was basic authentication, which was a problem. Good for development, okay for development. I mean, all this shit is, to me, a little bit annoying. And
yeah, I think it's actually pretty active. So maybe there might be some plugin something, but anyways, EKS. I guess I don't care. Because the whole premise and point of Kubernetes is to be cloud agnostic. Not even cloud, like you run it on your Raspberry Pi cluster if you want. That's really cool. The Amazon is like, that just shows me that Kubernetes is dominating, right? If they're going to pull the trigger and build an infrastructure for Kubernetes, it's for good reason, because that's what the world wants. But no, I think it's great. I think more people should take advantage of more managed Kubernetes services that are out there, just because it does take the burden of, and at Invoca, when I was there, we had our ops guys building a cluster manually, and they needed to support UDP and all these crazy things, and we had to use like, it was just like this whole flannel network overlay that had to be disabled, and like building and maintaining your own cluster is, if you can not do that and let AWS or GKE or whatever you want to do take care of that stuff, then by all means go for it. I don't know what EKS offers that others don't, though.
Oh, by the way, I did want to clarify, because I kind of was I wanted to fully finish the thought. When I said annoying, what I meant was annoying in development. All this stuff's annoying in development for me. It's extra. It goes back to another, like what you were talking about, as it being kind of a business decision, whether it's security or whether it's just the overhead of working with this and multiple teams working with like bunch of microservices and Kubernetes. It's a factor. I mean, I felt that pain before.
Yeah, and most of the time, developers don't want to go down the Kubernetes route. Like turns into an ops problem.
Someone says COPS is talking about COPS. I haven't heard of that before with Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's what's the other? KubeADM is another one. I think it's just to build Kubernetes clusters in basically a single command. And that's a really popular one, COPS is. I haven't played with it because I still am using GKE, but I should go through and evaluate all these command line utilities. But COPS is a good one. KubeADM is another one that I actually use within Minikube to bootstrap Kubernetes Minikube clusters, because KubeADM starts up certain services that the standard local cluster that Kubernetes uses, the Minikube uses, doesn't. So there's lots of different bootstrapping mechanisms. And COPS is, yeah, I think what most people use in AWS, probably. I don't know what else.
I don't know. I went ahead and linked it though.
Cool. Links for days.
So, and then there was feedback, and it was basically like the reason for using EKS is just basically offloading painful parts of Kubernetes to AWS.
Yeah, well, and that's what the cool thing is. You can also use AWS's key storage and S3 and all the stuff that we know and love about AWS, you get to keep your Kubernetes cluster there and not have to use something like kops, which is probably fine, but people want a native solution. So, and I just think ECS it's just not Kubernetes. It's not the same.
Yeah, you just put your database on S3, then you tell us where it's at, allow anonymous authentication. And
well, they probably already did that.
Profit. Yeah, they probably already did that, right?
Well, yeah, and you would never like use RBAC, or you would never use any sort of like authentication for your Kubernetes API either.
Yeah.
That's well, I was going to mention the Tesla thing. Redlock released a February 20th, like what kind of happened with, I know the last episode I was just in chat, you guys were talking about that. They were able to find the AWS S3 access key and secret access key via Kubernetes.
Yep.
So I'll paste this to you. I mean, your Google foo is strong, but here. So I think this is just the beginning of people going after Kubernetes. People have been looking at open S3 buckets and stuff forever, but Kubernetes, I think there's lots of potential in both, the bad side of things, but also for us as security professionals to start writing tools that can help audit Kubernetes clusters, defend against certain types of privilege escalation attacks, and even just like mass scanning tools. That's kind of like style, like who has open Kubernetes APIs without auth that we can just go kubectl create and just do stuff, because they exist, so.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, with Showdown or whatever, I'm sure somebody's looked at it, right? But it may be a interesting place to start.
Yeah,
and talk about all the little utilities that Jerry Gamblin has been writing. That this fits hand in hand with those as far as monitoring for the different services and everything else that's out there, whether that's Redis or anytime that a management tool is open to the public, that's a bad thing, right?
It never ends very well.
No.
Oops, yeah. So and just the implications are just high with Kubernetes. That's all. That's my concern from a defensive perspective. Is like, okay, we're not just talking like an S3 bucket necessarily. Like we just saw AWS keys open from a web UI.
Yep.
Not good.
Well, and it becomes another management problem, right? I mean, because it's so easy for a developer to go into AWS or into Google Cloud and actually spin something up, and they're pushing all these secrets and everything into it, and you may not have any idea as a security team that that's happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the rogue IT is a bigger problem nowadays than it was, 10, 15 years ago because of the cloud services. So.
Yeah, and on that note, some people like to split up their Kubernetes clusters and dev, QA, prod, whatever namespaces, and that can work. But I think your risk of messing that up is high. So I would recommend just go with separate clusters. Like it's almost like different AWS accounts. Like just do it if you want your production environment to only be managed by these certain people, and you don't want the headache of bolting on all these different layers of security and maintaining that as well. Like there's a lot you get out of the box from just creating a separate account. And I would recommend that with Kubernetes if possible. So yeah.
Cool. Good. Let's see. I think we have another question.
I'm trying to keep up. Yes. What sort of test frameworks are people using to help avoid these sort of configuration mistakes with Kubernetes? Oh, like a test harness? Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I know you can definitely speak to that. That's part of it.
Well, you kind of choose your own adventure, really. I mean, I haven't come across a good framework for like writing tests or anything like that. The thing that I would start with is running something like Cube, what it is, the AppSec tool, Kubebench. Make sure you're passing all of your tests and through that scan in CI and CD and whatnot. And I don't know, like use a trusted repository. And
so along those lines, Kubebench, does it just check the configuration files, or is it doing actual like dynamic tests, like the SSH tests you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff is like, you almost need to write custom tests with, because Kubebench is really just taking a YAML file.
Okay.
I don't think it actually has any sort of like, it doesn't run in your cluster or anything. Sysdig Falco is an interesting open source container security project as well. I had a little bit of trouble getting it to do meaningful things in my Kubernetes cluster, but I do think that was a while ago, and I do think they've also come a long way in the Kubernetes realm. So check out Sysdig Falco, and that's more of a sidecar. It basically is like monitoring files, almost OSX style container that runs alongside your pods. But yeah, I mean, a test harness or a test framework, you could use something like a gauntlet, I guess, you know, where you're like,
yeah,
why not? I mean, you could say it's just hard, the dynamic nature of Kubernetes. You're really like,
well, yeah, you've almost got to suck in all the YAML files and then the current running configuration, and yeah, it's not a problem to solve. Right?
No, and then you just gave another tool basically admin access to your cluster. So then
I'll pop something up on GitHub. Just trust it. It's fine.
Yeah, and that's one more service token that you need to provide to it. And I don't know, like, if it's worth it, then sure. But that's the thing. It's tricky, right? It's we don't have these mature tool sets. And, you know, maybe the twist locks and the Aqua securities do all the things, but I really don't evaluate many commercial tools, so I can't speak for them.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to get your take on some of that. You know, maybe in another episode, right? You know, if we could put you in touch with some of those vendors, because I've done some interesting like demos with, you know, both Twistlock and, you know, like Threat Stack, and some of the info that's coming back out of there is pretty interesting. And definitely it's picking up like the vuln scanner type, you know, hey, guess what? You're running a outdated instance of Ubuntu as your initial
sure
container, right?
That's
a given. Pretty easy to find if you know where to look. But
yeah, and I really think that, I don't know, not to plug training again, but like, okay, I still fall back to like more knowledge is power when it comes to any of this stuff. AWS is no different. Like, you can get yourself in a tangled mess of AWS services that somehow become insecure, and you don't even know it. The same way you can with Kubernetes. So I really think you kind of need some eyes on this sort of technology right now, mainly because I'm not a firm believer in like throw a tool in there and we're good to go. Anyways, they can definitely help. Vuln scanners help. It all is good stuff. But you need a team knowing what that report is sending back to you, like what to do with that. Is it a false positive? And really in the container world, I just don't think enough people would be able to take action on certain things that are getting spit out anyways. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the size of the DevOps team is usually pretty small in comparison to the number of developers and people that are spinning stuff up, right?
Yeah.
Just in general.
Yeah, and really, like, dev is prod and internal is external, and you can't just say, oh, we have a separate environment, we're good, because I guarantee somebody somewhere didn't mean to, but they slipped up and has some shared services, and that's all it takes. So there's lots of opportunities to pivot in this new world we're in. So definitely just learn up on it and read the docs. And I just suggest spinning up a cluster, SSH to the master node, see what is going on in there, because it's not just kubectl wizardry.
Cool. Good. Well, yeah, we've been going for a while.
Oh yeah.
We do have one more. I mean, this is the most amount of questions I've ever seen on any of these episodes. So people are clearly interested in what you have to say.
Buy my training.
Yes. Buy Jimmy's training. No. So this one is basically like, do you trust Kubernetes secret store? Or do you recommend something else? Somebody was like, don't use CyberArk. I don't know anything about any of this. So no.
I can't speak to CyberArk, but I have heard a couple of my larger customers discussing CyberArk. But anyways, I can speak. The Kubernetes secret store has gotten a lot of heat over the past like 2 years. That everyone's just like, you can access it from any node. Every pods have access to it. It's not encrypted. This, that, and the other thing. I would say it's come a long way. I actually have a whole. I'm taking this like huge. I should just publish it as a blog post. I should do that more often now that I'm talking about that. But like secrets are getting better, and especially like if you manage them correctly and plug in something like a vault into your Kubernetes cluster or outside your Kubernetes cluster, I think they have their place. They don't give you quite the protection you would get from using something like Vault, obviously. And again, you can mess up secrets, and everyone's like, they're base 64 encoded, and that's it. That's not encryption, but that's not the point. They just consume base 60 entities. So that's how Kubernetes just ingests secrets. But I do find them, it's definitely useful, and I'm still like a little unclear on, there's conflicting documentation on, so Kubernetes in the doc says like only a pod that needs access, that claims to need access to that secret gets access to that secret, and not any other pod. But I haven't got in and like tested that out fully, and I haven't found a lot of documentation on it. So if you're going to use secrets, again, understand how it works. Plug in something like Vault if that's what you're using, or KMS. And I think that those can play nicely as well. In the training, we spin up Vault in the Kubernetes cluster, and then use that to deploy secrets to Kubernetes into the pods themselves. So you could do a hybrid, but I do think that's going to be an area that they will continue to work on in the future, because all people want is straight up Vault backend in Kubernetes, and just to be done with it, and to not use this etcd encryption thing. Like nobody wants that right now, including me. So I see like Kelsey Hightower is working on that. There's a lot of like momentum towards a better secret backend. So just keep an eye on it, and use the encryption. And I mean, don't be afraid to use it if that's what you got. But if you have another key store that you're already using, plug that in.
Well, we have pumped you for information. I mean, this has been an onslaught of great questions, great answers. So this
you guys said we were just gonna sit and hang out and drink beer.
I know, right? We really, yeah. The viewers really put you through the ringer here. So thank you.
I love it, man. Like this is what I'm doing right now. I'm really interested in this space. So if anybody has any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter, or mestamachine.io is my one landing page that I haven't had a chance to work on too much, but I got an email address, and yeah, happy to talk about any of this stuff.
Well, yeah, and if you're not, I mean, in a couple months again, if you've got more time, we'd love to have you back on, and we can dig deeper into some of this.
Yeah, and I think maybe after I do this first round of trainings on site, and I talk to some people and see what's out in the wild, I'll have a better a better perspective and able to give like, super detailed recommendations, or maybe everything's gravy and everyone's using all of the things they should be. So
yes, that is how the world works.
I always come in with that expectation, so it's all good.
So you're always disappointed. That's what you're saying.
Isn't that why we got into this job? It's not gonna work.
You haven't been in the industry long enough then. Right? At this point, we go in with low expectations. So if they have anything, we're surprised and happy, right?
You cross the void into security curmudgeon.
Yeah.
I felt those urges. Yeah.
This gray beard comes from. It's not from. Wait, I might be a teenager too. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so do you blog at Mesta Machine, or because you had mentioned you had a blog, and I wanted to make sure we got that linked up on the live chat and also in the description of the video.
No, I don't. It's just literally a landing page. I had a blog. It's no longer existent, and I need to be more vocal. So yeah, it's like,
let us know, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like doing stuff like this because I can just get in and talk, and it's time blocked. And I've had like to-do lists, like blog something for like 6 months now. So,
well, we appreciate it. I know the viewers appreciate it, and you gave us all a bunch of information. So seriously, thank you for joining us, for answering these questions. Like you said, we were telling you like, oh, it's just going to be shooting the shit, and here we are. Almost an hour and a half later.
We're like, well, tell me about this. All right, yeah.
More than happy to do it. It's always fun hanging out with you guys, and if I'd love to like figure out a demo or something we can do in a couple months that's more interactive or something. There's a lot of fun to be had. So,
before we stop the broadcast, anything else you want to mention? Any conferences that you're going to be at? Obviously, anything that you can think of.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, I was like, I'm kind of taking this year as a, bond with a little one, and get my business churning. If I'll come talk to anybody if you want to pay me. So. No, I mean, I just don't have any conferences really, honestly, on the radar at the moment. So just kind of taking a breather this year. I did miss AppSec Cali. I'll be at Loco Moco Sec in Hawaii, and which will be really hard work. And that'll be a really awesome conference. And then maybe as things stabilize, I have a lot of travel lined up right now for giving this training. So I'm super excited about that. It's just not in the limelight, unfortunately.
Fair enough. I mean, I totally get that, especially with a newborn, 2 months old now. Yeah, that's for also, I'm assuming for your wife's sanity as well. And it's probably a good idea.
It's tough when you try to justify conferences that you're self-funding versus having your corporate sponsorships. It's a different mentality,
Yep.
I have to really want to be there.
Yeah. I mean, that's being independent. I mean, I know that's basically a whole other episode that you and Seth could just elaborate extensively on the interesting parts of that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that next time. Awesome.
Cool. All right.
Well, thanks again. I'm going to go ahead and close out this broadcast. If you have any questions, actually, before I stop, two other things. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, speaker suggestions, whatever, anyone you want to hear or ask questions of or whatever it is, absoluteappsec@gmail.com. So it's absoluteappsec@gmail.com. Another thing is we do have our site up and running, absoluteappsec.com. It's still kind of a work in progress. And we should have the pasted there a way to sign up for Slack, and then we'll review just so we can filter out spam and then approve you. That way we have like a little community we can kind of cultivate on Slack, and these links aren't ephemeral. Anyways, those updates aside, thanks everyone for joining us. Seth, anything you want to say before we close it out?
Nope. Yeah, visit the site. Let us know how it looks or what's crappy. That's great too. But thanks again, Jimmy, for joining us. And we'll see everybody next week.
Cool. It's been fun. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Take it easy.